America just turned 250 years old, and somehow the birthday party made more headlines than the birthday itself. Because while the fireworks were supposed to be the biggest in U.S. history, the real fireworks were happening somewhere else entirely, in a president's Truth Social feed, on a soccer pitch, on the steps of the Capitol, and in a courtroom that most Americans didn't even know existed until this week. So let's get into it. Every story here, every claim, every link is sourced and on screen right now so you can check it yourself. This is everything that happened over the last 7 days, why it's blowing up online, and what it tells us about where this is all headed before the midterms. Let's start with the party itself. This was supposed to be the celebration to end all celebrations. A sprawling month-long state fair on the National Mall, military flyovers, a speech promised to be, in his own words, really long, and the largest fireworks display in American history. Instead, here's what actually happened. A brutal heat wave forced the cancellation of the traditional Independence Day parade. Then, incoming thunderstorms got so severe that the entire National Mall had to be evacuated hours before the main event even started. And this wasn't the administration's first attendance scare of the summer. According to the Daily Beast, officials were already nervous going into the weekend because an earlier rally that same month had a visibly disappointing turnout, including people walking out mid-speech. So when the storms hit Saturday evening and thousands of guests were sent to shelter in place for safety, the optics were rough. But here's where the story gets interesting, because rather than letting the weather be the headline, it became a story about who saved the night. HuffPost's reporting on the aftermath is genuinely wild. The president fired off more than 100 posts on Truth Social in a single night. In the middle of that spree, he claimed he personally overturned a cancellation of the event, even though it was the National Park Service, not the president, that had ordered the shelter in place in the first place, purely for safety reasons. The event simply resumed a few hours later once the weather cleared, and the speech ran on well past midnight. More than 100 posts, one night. That's not a birthday message, that's a body of work. Then there was the speech itself. Look, every president gets a little poetic on the 4th of July. That's the job description. But according to Rolling Stone's coverage of the event, some of the historical claims made on stage left even casual viewers scratching their heads. At one point, the Civil War, including the story of someone escaping slavery to fight for the Union, was described on stage as, and I'm paraphrasing the reporting here, basically a pretty big deal at the time. Not exactly the framing you'd expect from a semi-quincentennial address supposedly built around the nation's founding ideals. The speech also leaned heavily into religious rhetoric, tying the Declaration of Independence to the idea that Americans are made in the image of one God, and using that framing to draw a hard contrast with the word we're about to spend the next few minutes on. There was also a moment where, discussing his military record in office, the president referenced his third term before quickly correcting himself to second term, saying he didn't want any controversy. Make of that what you will. Which brings us to the word of the summer, communist. This isn't new. Branding political opponents as communists or socialists is a page straight out of a very old playbook, one that traces back to the McCarthy era of the 1950s, when accusing someone of communist sympathies was often less about facts and more about ending careers and silencing critics. What's different now is the timing. With midterms coming in November, this messaging is clearly designed to do one thing: turn the other side into an existential threat rather than a political rival. Al Jazeera reported that at a rally near Mount Rushmore, the president explicitly called communism a mortal threat and tied that rhetoric directly to his hardline immigration agenda, a clear signal that this messaging isn't going away before Election Day. If anything, it's going to get louder. Here's the thing about language like that. It works precisely because it's simple. You don't need evidence. You don't need a policy argument. You just need a scary word, repeated often enough until it becomes shorthand for anyone who disagrees with me. And it doesn't stop at rhetoric. The Hill also reported this week that a federal judge blocked an administration plan to use a Department of Homeland Security database, one containing sensitive personal information, to vet voter eligibility nationwide. That's not a rhetorical fight anymore. That's a real legal fight over real Americans' private data, playing out at the exact same moment the communist messaging is ramping up. Critics argue the two are connected. Paint your opponents as an existential threat first, then justify aggressive new tools to protect the country from them. Now, here's a story that hasn't gotten nearly enough attention, and it's a genuinely remarkable one. An active-duty U.S. Air Force major was arrested, in uniform, on the steps of the Capitol after publicly calling for the president's impeachment. According to multiple outlets, including NBC News and Military Times, Major Jason Watson stood on the House steps and read out a list of what he called impeachable offenses, from the use of military force in Iran and Venezuela without congressional authorization to the handling of immigration enforcement. He was arrested after the member of Congress who'd escorted him, Representative Al Green, left the area, because standing on those steps without a sitting member present is technically against Capitol rules. Watson said plainly that he isn't a Democrat and doesn't share Green's politics. He just believes, in his words, that the constitutional impeachment process is our best pathway to restore fidelity to our Constitution. It's a striking image regardless of where you stand politically. A career military officer risking 20-plus years of service to make a public stand. Now here's a story that's genuinely gone viral across multiple continents this week, and it has nothing to do with a speech. It's about a soccer match. During the World Cup, U.S. striker Folarin Balogun picked up a red card in a round of 32 match after stepping on an opponent's foot. Under normal rules, that meant a suspension for the next match against Belgium. Then, according to Euronews, the president personally called FIFA president Gianni Infantino. Shortly after, FIFA reversed the red card, clearing Balogun to play. The reaction has been enormous. Belgium's Football Association called the decision astonishing and said it directly contradicted competition regulations. A member of the European Parliament said, "A decision suddenly becomes unjust the moment a certain someone gets involved." And social media has nicknamed the entire episode the Trump card, a phrase now trending across both Europe and the U.S. Whether or not you follow soccer, the optics are hard to miss. A sitting U.S. president making a personal call to reverse a sports officiating decision in the middle of the biggest tournament on earth is the kind of story that transcends politics and just becomes a symbol. Fair or not, the Trump card is now shorthand for one thing: the idea that the normal rules bend when he gets involved. One more thing worth flagging before we wrap up, because it connects directly to that third-term slip we mentioned earlier. In a recent Meet the Press interview, the president made a series of claims about the war with Iran, saying U.S. strikes had totally obliterated a key nuclear site and that Iran's Navy, Air Force, and anti-aircraft capabilities were entirely gone. NBC News' own fact check of that interview found the reality was more complicated. Independent assessments, including from the International Atomic Energy Agency, indicated Iran still retained significant stockpiles of enriched uranium after the strikes, and that roughly half of the country's unconventional naval forces remained intact. It's a small thing on its own, but stack it next to the July 4th history rewrite, the communist framing, and the FIFA phone call, and you start to see the same instinct playing out again and again. Control the story first, worry about the facts later. That's not a partisan observation, it's just what the paper trail shows. Put all of this together: the July 4th chaos, the historical revisionism, the communist rhetoric, the blocked voter database, an active duty officer arrested for demanding impeachment, and a president personally intervening in a World Cup match, and a pattern starts to emerge that commentators across multiple outlets pointed to this week. A consistent blurring of the line between the presidency as an institution and the president as an individual brand. CNN's analysis of the America 250 celebrations put it directly. The country's 250th anniversary was, in large part, rebranded around one man, down to banners on federal buildings and a month-long Great American State Fair carrying his name. Critics argue that's a meaningful departure from how administrations of both parties have traditionally treated national commemorations as shared, non-partisan moments. Supporters, of course, see it differently, as strong, unapologetic leadership, unafraid to fight for the country or its allies, whether that's naming a political threat outright or backing an American athlete in a high-stakes match. That's the argument you'll hear from his defenders, and it's worth acknowledging plainly. Not everyone watching this sees a scandal. Some see a president willing to use every tool available on behalf of the people who voted for him. So where does that leave us heading into the fall? A president who's made communist his midterm rallying cry. A legal fight over voter data still working its way through the courts. An active duty military officer arrested for demanding accountability. And a nickname, the Trump card, now trending in 2 different sports and 2 different continents. Whichever side of this you're on, one thing is true. This week showed exactly how blurry the line has gotten between governing, campaigning, and personal brand. And that's a story that isn't going away before November. Every link, every source is right there on screen and in the description below. Go check them yourself, form your own opinion, and tell me where you land. If you want to stay on top of this as it keeps developing, subscribe, turn on notifications, and drop your take in the comments. Do you think this communist messaging actually works on voters, or is it wearing thin? Let me know below.